So we know about how grief can be so overwhelming sometimes, and our emotions, especially grief and even surprisingly compassion, can sometimes be misplaced, and it can make us take irrational decisions out of extreme emotions. Like guilt and shame, misplaced compassion, भी ये तीनों चीजें, शर्म एंड एटर्नल इंडियन क्वेश्चन, लोग क्या कहेंगे, इस वजह से हम कभी कभी ऐसे निर्णय ले लेते हैं जो हमें और या फिर हमारे पेशेंट को जरूरत से ज्यादा प्रोसीजर दिलवाते हैं. We or our patient goes through more torture of procedures which may even be ineffective in spite of knowing that the interventions are futile. For example, we had an 88-year-old lady a few years ago with a bad brain stroke who was kept on life maintenance systems because her two sons were arguing कि नहीं नहीं सब करना है, and they were actually even quarreling about who is going to pay her bill, but they said करना तो सब है. At the end of 2 months, she died with a hefty bill, over which again the sons were further arguing कि कौन कितने पैसे देगा. So the waiting rooms of ICUs are emotionally intense areas full of fluctuating feelings and sometimes even family drama. So Dr. Shivkumar Iyer is going to tell us about his experiences in the ICU. I'm going to share my screen for an introduction of Dr. Shivkumar Iyer. He is a practicing intensivist and physician from Pune. He graduated from BJ Medical College and completed his MD Medicine in 1992, obtained the European Diploma in Intensive Care in the year 2000, and has since worked in the field of intensive care. He has been the All India President of ISCCM in 2015-16. Currently, he is the Professor and HOD of Critical Care Medicine in BV Bharati Vidyapith BU Medical College. His interests include end-of-life care and palliative care in the ICU setting, medical education and bioethics. He has been awarded the prestigious Commonwealth Scholarship UK for pursuing the MSc Palliative Medicine course at the Cardiff University. He is currently in his second year. So he is studying right now. He is also the member of the organization ELICIT, which is acting on the national level for advocacy and education for end-of-life care and palliative care. And I think he is a very, very strong advocate, and I would call him a warrior against futile medical interventions. And he promotes early decisions of comfort care. He is also a very strong advocate for good communication skills for doctors, especially in the intensive care setting. ICU में डॉक्टर्स ने बहुत अच्छी तरह से संवाद करना है पेशेंट के रिश्तेदारों से. That is a mandatory part of his training, and good communication is a part of good treatment. So over to you, Dr. Shivkumar Iyer, sir.
Thank you, Purnima. Good evening, everybody. I can see that there are about 50 odd participants, and I think many of them are not medical professionals. So forgive me if some of the words that I use may sound medical. I will try to explain those in layperson terms, and in the question answer session, we can probably discuss that a bit more. So the topic given to me by Purnima is futile medical interventions in ICU, difficulties in the ICU. Greek medicine from the time of Hippocrates and Ayurveda from the time of Charaka and Sushruta have recommended that physicians should not offer treatment that is non-beneficial to patients who are overwhelmed by their disease process. And this is in keeping with one of the fundamental principles of bioethics, fundamental principles of ethics in the ICU, which states that patients have to evaluate whether a particular treatment is going to be beneficial and whether that it should not be harmful. So it's called the principle of beneficence and the principle of non-maleficence. So the balance between the principle of beneficence and non-maleficence decides whether an intervention should be done or not. And this can be very difficult in modern times. In the olden days, emphasis was placed on the physician's judgment as to whether the disease process, whether the patient would survive or not, and whether treatment in such a situation would be beneficial or not, was the thing which guided decision making. In fact, Ayurvedic physicians were specially instructed to recognize dying patients and not to offer curative remedies to such patients. This principle was called upekshanam. However, with the advent of human rights and the principle of autonomy on the one hand, and the ever-increasing capabilities of modern medicine to provide life support to patients overwhelmed by their disease process on the other hand, make decision-making hugely complicated in dying patients. And, we are facing this day in and day out in this current COVID-19 pandemic. So what we need is that physicians and of course patients and their families need to understand this concept of futility, what is meant by potentially inappropriate or disproportionate treatment in dying patients, in order to facilitate ethically correct treatment in such conditions. So what is futility? It is a term that is used when reasonable measures for maintenance of life are unlikely to result in meaningful survival. So all these terms are important: reasonable measures, maintenance of life, and unlikely to result in meaningful survival. And we'll be going through some of these things as we go along. There is a very narrow term which is called physiological futility, and doctors use this to signify that interventions may be futile when they do not meet physiological goals. So I'll just explain to you what I mean by this. So for example, I want to put a ventilator on in order to increase the oxygen that goes to the lung. If putting the ventilator on does not increase the oxygen going to the lung, then that would denote physiological futility. Or I want to give some blood pressure medications, and with these blood pressure medications, I hope that the blood pressure will come up, and the blood pressure does not come up. Then such an intervention of BP medication or of the ventilator is said to be physiologically futile. Well, many times, given the many interventions that are so effective, physiological futility does not occur until very late in the illness. And by that time, like Purnima pointed out, many people have hefty bills and they've been treating something which may not have futility in other senses. So what are these other senses then? So there is this term called medical futility, and it comprises so many of these subtypes. Not all of them may be subtypes, but let me just explain what I mean. So first term that I use is quantitative futility. So quantitative futility is, you can say that if there is a less than 1% chance that my medical intervention is going to work and the patient is going to survive, then that is quantitative futility. Now, qualitative futility could mean that it will not lead to an appropriate quality of life. Then a lethal condition futility could be you have something like, say, for example, a cancer, which is going to be lethal in time to come. And since this condition is going to be lethal, and of course, for it to be lethal, there should be no appropriate treatments, medical treatments that are going to help the patient survive that illness. So that would be called lethal condition futility. Then there is something called imminent demise futility. In these COVID-19 days, we may sometimes have patients who come in very late to the emergency department, and they come with very low oxygen levels. Their blood pressure too is very low, their heart rate is low. And in such patients, doing medical interventions or subjecting them to CPR or cardiopulmonary resuscitation may not be of any use. So this would be called an imminent demise futility. And then, of course, there is this very controversial term called economic futility, where it may not make sense for the family unit or for the state to pursue the treatment of a particular condition because it is economically futile. Many families are pushed below the poverty line due to what is called catastrophic medical expenditure in the face of serious or critical illness. And the estimate is that 64% of families which face such catastrophic illness, they are pushed below the poverty line. And these are statistics from India. So these are all terms which are used around this futility. So when should we consider interventions in the ICU as inappropriate or disproportionate? ICU interventions should generally be considered inappropriate when there is no reasonable expectation that the patient will improve sufficiently to survive outside the acute care setting. Okay, so that is one thing. So that means I'm putting the patient on the ventilator, I'm putting the vasopressors on. Now, if the patient later is not going to survive outside the acute care setting, then such an intervention would be inappropriate or disproportionate. Or neurological function. When there is no reasonable expectation that the patient's neurological function will improve sufficiently to allow the patient to perceive the benefits of treatment. So this could, mean a patient with a neurological condition where his higher functions are affected and he is no longer able to communicate with the treating team or the family, and the treating team or the family is not able to communicate with the patient, what would be described as a persistent vegetative state. So in such cases, medical interventions, especially like ventilator or BP medicines or cardiopulmonary resuscitations, would be considered inappropriate or disproportionate. And of course, this is not exhaustive. There will be cases in which life-prolonging interventions may be reasonably considered to be inappropriate, even when these above criteria are not met. Now, there is this term, controversial, which is called potentially inappropriate. So here, what happens is, it alludes to the conflict that may exist between patients and treating doctors. So it has some chance of accomplishing the effect that is sought by the patient or maybe the family or certain clinicians, but other clinicians believe that competing ethical considerations justify not providing these interventions. So this is a statement which is given from the American Thoracic Society and of course many other critical care societies and College of Physicians. So there are many ethical challenges that come up in situations where futility has to be determined and you have to determine whether intervention should be continued or stopped. So first is speaking to the family without involving the patient, even when the patient, he or she, is competent. So this is the first thing. We tend to talk to family rather than talk to patients, even when they are able to make decisions. Second is being able to identify the appropriate surrogates. So many times we have found in large joint families, the wife, especially if she's a housewife, she sometimes may be left at home and the rest of the family is making decisions for her. Or maybe the people who are taking financial decisions, whether to continue treatment or not, are making decisions without involving the appropriate surrogate. In this case, the person would be the wife or the husband, and the wife or the husband needs to be involved. So identifying the appropriate surrogate is another ethical challenge. Then the third thing, and which is so common in multidisciplinary, multi-professional medical treatment, is the diffusion of responsibility among the treating team, especially the clinicians, that lead to difficulties for the family in identifying who exactly is making decisions, who is the captain of the ship. So that's another ethical challenge. Then exploring the definition concept of futility and inappropriate and disproportionate therapy. Then the lack of agreement in the treating team and surrogates regarding futility and treatment goals. And I've already alluded to that when I discussed potentially inappropriate treatment. Then ethical conflict between the patient and the family autonomy and what the best interests, that is the balance of beneficence and non-maleficence, that has been judged by the treating team. And this is probably the most important ethical conflict that arises during medical treatment in the ICU. And then, of course, how does one go about getting a second opinion? How does one use clinical ethics committees? And we will be going to that in the subsequent slides. So this conflict, disagreement that may occur in deciding whether treatment is disproportionate or inappropriate or futile is something which is very common. And we need to work out ways in which this can be resolved. The first and foremost thing, especially for doctors, is to follow this pathway, which has been prepared initially by the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, then a joint statement by the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine and the Indian Association of Palliative Care, and of course then the FICCI, which is the apex industrial body in our country, and ELICIT, which is End of Life in India Task Pathway. So this pathway has this flow chart, and you can see, if you look at the top left corner, the first step is to be able to accurately identify terminal illness, the prognosis from that terminal illness, and the inappropriateness of the life-sustaining intervention. This should lead to establishment of consensus first among all healthcare providers. So once the healthcare providers who are providing treatment, doctors, patients, different consultants, all have agreed that there is inappropriateness, the next step would be to determine whether the patient is competent or not. If the patient is competent, then of course, we need to talk to the patient and take the process forward. If the patient is not competent, and not competent means medically not competent to be able to take decisions, we need to see if there is a advanced medical care directive available. So AMD stands for Advanced Medical Care Directive, and I think we're going to have a little bit more on this. So if AMD is available, then you work with the appointed healthcare proxy or the next of kin. If it is not available, then you identify the appropriate surrogate. The next step, and of course, if the patient is competent also, the next step is to honestly disclose the terminal illness, the prognosis, and the inappropriateness of life-sustaining interventions, and then indulge in what is called shared decision-making with open and repeated discussions. If there is no conflict, then you can go ahead and implement the plan for withholding, withdrawing support, providing palliative care, after-death care, and bereavement care, as Arvind has just pointed out. And then, of course, you can have a review of the care process in order to improve the quality of what you do. If there is conflict, then you need to go through a conflict resolution process. So in dealing with conflict, it is important to enlist expert help. Give notice of this process of conflict and what dispute resolution process you're doing to the surrogates. Obtain a second opinion. Perform review by an interdisciplinary hospital ethics committee. Offer the surrogates the opportunity to transfer patient to an alternate institution if that is possible. Inform the surrogates of the opportunity to pursue judicial remedies, and then, if it comes to, implement the decision of the judicial process. Now, what happens after the decision to withhold or withdraw is made? So you appropriately withhold, withdraw life-sustaining treatment, provide appropriate symptom management. So withholding or withdrawing life-sustaining interventions does not mean that the patient should suffer. So in all circumstances, pain and other symptoms will and should be adequately managed. The family should be completely supported during this process, and bereavement care should be provided to them. There are many barriers which come up in providing appropriate end-of-life care, and these include fear of death and uncertainty in laypersons and doctors alike, lack of awareness among doctors and laypersons about guidelines and pathways, lack of adequate communication skills both among the doctors and among laypersons, and there is this fear of law among doctors, which I think is unjustified. How do we overcome these barriers? I think education and communication are the twin measures which can help to overcome barriers. So we need to focus on patient rights. We need to focus on physician obligations. And of course, we can think of the National Accreditation Board for Hospitals guidelines, which provide for hospital policies for hospitals to overcome barriers. Now you can see I have put two panels here. The panel on the left tells you about the patient rights, and these arise from many of the law processes which have happened in our country. So the right to refuse treatment is common law, and it is further strengthened by the Law Commission recommendations and two of the recent Supreme Court judgments. So the first judgment is this Justice Puttaswamy versus the Union of India, which protects patient autonomy. And then second is in Common Cause versus the Union of India. The Supreme Court clarified the legal validity of living wills and advanced medical directives and appropriate withholding and withdrawing of therapy, what is called foregoing of life support. So the Indian patient now has the right to execute an advanced medical directive, and by international consensus, it is also said that patients do not have the right to demand treatments that are not considered appropriate by their healthcare provider, as these are essentially medical decisions. So it kind of says that we also as doctors have some rights. What are our obligations? So our obligations are to practice the four cardinal principles of ethics, which include protecting, respecting patient autonomy, judging the balance of beneficence, non-maleficence, and providing distributive justice to the patient. Respect for autonomy is central to all medical practice. Despite doing interventions, despite the refusal of patient or surrogates, could be deemed as battery by the law. Like consent, refusal also should be appropriately documented. Physicians should be guided by standard treatment guidelines on ELC while weighing the benefit and harm of providing life-sustaining treatment. Then there are administrator duties, and then there is this hospital end-of-life care ethics committee, which can oversee these programs. And I think these are things which I can discuss as we go along. So it should include a director or his nominee of the ICU, the chief administrator of the hospital, an invited independent senior physician, a legal expert, and probably a layperson as well. This is about the hospital ethics committee, but I'm just going to skip this and maybe we can discuss this as we go along. So I'm at the end of my talk, and what I would like to say before I hand over to Purnima is that the COVID-19 pandemic has really, challenged all our ethical, legal, compassionate, and other areas in a very, very difficult and different way. And we, face this day in and day out. And I would be happy to share some of my experiences based on how the things go forward. I thank all of you for listening to me so patiently. Thank you so much. Purnima, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shiva. And this is a very important topic. बहुत बार पेशेंट्स को या उनके रिश्तेदारों को मालूम ही नहीं होता कि कोई इंटरवेंशन, कोई ट्रीटमेंट का फॉर्मेट काम नहीं करने वाला ये ऑप्शन मेडिकल फील्ड में भी है. और बहुत बार उनको लगता है कि अरे डॉक्टर तो बोल रहे हैं और मैंने अगर नहीं बोल दिया तो कैसे होगा, मेरी वजह से मेरे पेशेंट का नुकसान हो जाएगा. So understanding that they have a right to question the doctors and the doctors are to have transparent communication with them. ये बहुत बार पेशेंट्स को और उनके रिश्तेदारों को नहीं मालूम होता, which is why we gave this topic. फ्यूटाइल मेडिकल इंटरवेंशन मतलब वो ट्रीटमेंट का हिस्सा जो काम नहीं करने वाला, ये हमें स्टैटिस्टिक्स से पहले से ही मालूम है. तो दैट वाज द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ दिस टॉपिक. सरोगेट मतलब पेशेंट जब खुद निर्णय नहीं ले सकता तो उसके लिए कौन निर्णय लेगा, वो व्यक्ति, उसको लॉ के लीगल लैंग्वेज में सरोगेट डिसीजन मेकर बोला जाता है. So basically life is complex and some crossroads are even more complicated. Now on one hand I had this patient who was severe mentally challenged. He was a 32-year-old boy and his parents were constantly talking to me when he was admitted under my care in the ICU for more than a month with status epilepticus. That means patient keeps on getting seizure and his illness was going on. And on one hand his mother said कि सब करना है मेरे बेटे के लिए, मैं कौन होती हूँ उसका सब रोकने वाली. And on the other hand his father, who owned a pharmacy shop, used to be after me. He used to come and meet me twice a day saying कि मैडम मैं किसी को नहीं बताऊंगा, आप मुझे बताइए कौन सी दवाई है, मुझको उसका दर्द देखा नहीं जाता और वो इसमें से बाहर नहीं आने वाला मुझे मालूम है, आप मुझे बताइए मैं चुपके से उसको दे दूंगा. So he wanted to end it all for his son. And on the other hand, there was this senior patient with me. He was a freedom fighter who got admitted with a very bad brain stroke. And during his tenure under me for 1.5 months, he was put on ventilator twice. And he was the one who gave me the lesson of withholding and withdrawing for the first time in my life. When it was the third time to put him on a ventilator and I was there by his bedside, I was just a fresh consultant at that time. और मैं उनको वेंटिलेटर लगाने ही वाली थी जब उन्होंने हाथ ऐसा सामने करके मुझे रोका. He asked for a paper and a pen and in his distressed state, in a shaking hand, he scribbled कि रामायण झालं आता रामाला जाऊ दे. So he wanted to take leave of this world and from his suffering and his irreparable physical state. So we all know about आनंद. बहुत सुंदर हिंदी सिनेमा था जिसमें राजेश खन्ना का बहुत फेमस डायलॉग था कि हम सब रंगमंच की कठपुतलियां हैं, कब क्या कैसे कौन चला जाएगा कोई नहीं बता सकता. तो जीवन बिल्कुल ही सरल नहीं है और जीवन के कुछ चौराहे तो बहुत ही ज्यादा कॉम्प्लेक्स और क्लिष्ट होते हैं. So I'm going to interrupt this very serious discussion right now with a small little song. आइए सुनते हैं हमारी इंटर्न आकांक्षा से ये गाना.
नहीं नहीं ये बातें हैं पुरानी, कैसी पहेली है ये, कैसी पहेली जिंदगानी. हाँ थाम रोका इसको किसने, हाँ ये तो बहता पानी. कैसी पहेली है ये, कैसी पहेली जिंदगानी. ला 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 ला. कैसे सोनी ये छाँव हो सुहानी। वो कैसी पहेली है ये, कैसी पहेली जिंदगानी। थामा रोका इसको किसने, हाँ ये तो बहता पानी। ओ कैसी पहेली है ये, कैसी पहेली जिंदगानी।
Thank you, Akanksha. So, and I thank Dr. Shiva for giving such a comprehensive overview of medical futility.